That's good.
So, can everybody see that?
Yes.
And can everybody hear me as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of an update about the Goddards, but I thought I've talked to you a few times before about about genetics. So I'll do a bit of that as well. Perhaps we can take some questions at the end. This is something that, of course, you all know, where the Goddards hung out over, a couple of 100 years ago, mainly a whole lot down in the Wiltshire, Hampshire area, the Suffolk Goddards, and of course the sort of the Derbyshire, Yorkshire contingents, and of course a whole lot of people in London. But that won't come as a surprise to any of you. So just a little bit about science. Of course, the DNA is all in our chromosomes, of which there are 22 pairs, and one has come from our mum and the other has come from our dad. And we make a lot of use of that to try and find out where we've come from and who we are related to. And of course, you'll see down the bottom at the X chromosome, you'll have 2 of them generally if you're female, and if you're male, you'll have a female one and one of these small male ones. And that's really, it's the male Y chromosome that we look at because it's the male line that we carry our name from. A little bit more about where the DNA comes from. In each cell there's a nucleus, that's the thing on the left, which holds those chromosomes, and if you were to pull them out, and you'll see that double helix sort of structure, and if you could sort of stretch it out, you've got a helical backbone to the DNA, which is very strong, and the 2 strands are joined together by some things we call nucleotides that have different chemicals attached to them. There's only 4 chemicals, a C, a T, an A and a G, and it's that sequence of those chemicals that tells the body everything about what we should be like, look like, how we function and all the rest of it. But the genealogy people actually don't make much use of that sequence, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So you'll be aware that we have half of our DNA from our mum, half from our dad, but just looking at these pictures, you'll see that the child in this picture doesn't have exactly the same proportion of those 2 chromosomes from the mother and from the father. Of course, the mother and the father have got half their DNA from there. So there is unequal sharing of the bits from our grandparents that come into the child. And here I've just extended that a bit. And you can see that the child 1, the top band is a chromosome from the maternal side, and you can see that what the mother had in that case, and she's got a bit from her father and her mother, the grandfather and grandmother, and you'll see in child 1 there's nothing there that has come from the maternal grandmother to that child. Now that would be pretty unusual in a grandparent situation, but it's something we have to bear in mind as we look at genetics. Because we may be related to somebody down a family tree, but we won't necessarily find them in our genetics, in our DNA. So here is sort of a fan example of all of our possible ancestors. Well, let's say that we're in the middle there, and you can see the mother and the father, 50% each exactly. And the numbers on the left at 50, 25, 13, 6.3, 3.1 going towards the left tells you how much DNA on average, and remember it is on average, we share with the previous generation. And where I put the arrow is really about the limit of any sort of genetic analysis that we can do, and to be confident it has to be closer. But that would be about 4th to 5th cousins. So how many ancestors do we have? Well, there's a population in the UK about 6.5 million. We will all have a common ancestor, regardless of whether we think we're related or not. You and the person next door, or you and a random person in Scotland or wherever, will have a common ancestor who was born in around 1350. And everyone who was alive in about 1000, if they have produced offspring that are alive today, and that's about 80% of them, they will be the ancestors of all of us, which is interesting to think about. So Charlemagne, he was born in 702. He was the ruler of Western Europe, and there's about 40 generations between him and ours. Now, if he produced, and his progeny produced children at the regular rate, he would have 1 trillion ancestors. So the problem is that's many more than the number of people alive, but we are all related to him. So at some point, all ancestors who've left descendants today are ancestors of all living people. Some of those were Neanderthals, and some of us will have Neanderthal genes in our genome. And you can go on genetic sites and find those bits if you're interested, but it's not very important, I don't think. But just as Danny Dyer, he may have been able to prove a link down 1 male chromosome, but about 90% of us are also related to Edward III. So don't think you don't have a royal connection. Just to illustrate that a bit more, and this is a very complicated diagram, but down the bottom you'll see a blue blob and a pink blob, and effectively those are completely unrelated people who, if we go back in time, we can see their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents as we move back through the generations. And all I want to show you really on here is that obviously you have lots and lots of ancestors, and around generation 9 you'll see some black circles. That's where our 2 people, unrelated, actually share an ancestor. As we go back further in time, you can see generation 13, that black line where all those black circles are combining together. So we are all related to each other at that time. Now that sharing between people who are unrelated can cause problems if you're looking at genetics to look at your genealogy. And here's an illustration. This is a sort of crude version of my family tree. So here I am. I'm the bright yellow at the top, and you can see I've got a pink mother and a blue father. Very traditional here. And my Goddard line is actually the top blocks. But you can divide my great-grandparents, my 4 great-grandparents on my maternal side and my paternal side. So you can see that I've done there. And when I did my genetics, this third cousin popped up related to my paternal side. I know his name, but I don't particularly know him or anything. Now, you'll see that my father, who's the blue block in the middle, had a sister who's the pink block just below him. And that sister is the mother of my cousin, who's in the gold. And my aunt, the pink aunt, married this dark blue person and had my cousin. Now, this dark blue person is relatively unknown. He came into the family, nobody knew anything about him, but he did hang around for 15 years or so, and then he disappeared again. So my cousins all wondered, who was this person? There's no, although I've got a link to the Midlands, my father's side didn't come from the Midlands, it was London, and my cousin doesn't have any links to the Midlands, and her father appeared to have links to Hampshire, if anything. And it was through DNA that she found a third cousin that was the same third cousin that was linked to my maternal side. And yet that same person was linked to her paternal side. So there shouldn't be any genetic sharing between them. But there was. And once we had found out who her father really was, not who he said he was, we began to find out about his parents, and his mother, who's the magenta down the bottom. She was born in Nottingham, and my mother was born in Nottingham. So obviously it looks as though there is some link there. Another thing that's important to understand is that these two people down the bottom, the pink and the blue blob down the bottom, from completely the other side of the world, whether it's in an English-speaking world or whatever, if you go back in generations, here you can see a simulation with the world divided vertically into sort of longitudes, if you like. And as we go back in time, so there's a little bit of immigration that occurs, and we have DNA from the nearest sector, and as you go back in time, we all have a link to somebody on the other side of the world. I don't know if any of you have done any DNA testing. Where do you go? What about all these companies that you can go to? You can spend a lot of money going to these companies, and they do have big databases, and that can provide lots of answers for you or lots of questions. You may find that you haven't got there aren't any recent sort of ancestry hints for you, but you're bombarded with lots and lots and lots of fourth to sixth cousins. You don't know what to do with them, really. If you're going to do it, who should you be testing in your family? Well, those of us who've still got parents or grandparents, they're the most important. So if you can get their DNA, that will be very helpful, because they'll have DNA that you haven't inherited. All full siblings, if the above are not available. And this third cousin link between my cousin and myself was only really resolved because we also tested her brother. So that helped a lot. Half siblings, uncles and aunts, they're also very useful because we can see which side of the family these matches are. And you can also, as well as putting your DNA, once you've had a DNA test done, it'll give you a link to your data, which you can also put on this site called GEDmatch, which collects all the DNA from all the other companies and puts them all in one place. So if you've been tested with one company and your cousin has been tested with another company, this provides a way of linking those two families. Otherwise, you're going to be spending a lot of money. But a note of caution. It's enjoy the fun and be aware of the potential future consequences. Really, it's about understanding your informed consent, because these tests are common in America and they're being done in a country that has very different ethical standards and consent from us. The companies own your DNA. You may own the data, but they own your DNA. They're not interested in you. Your DNA is very valuable, and they make use of that for profit. They give you a bit of information. You're paying for them to give you that bit of information. They are making a lot of money. And they may say they anonymize that data. It doesn't mean you can't be identified. A colleague of mine went to, who had put their DNA on a UK biobank anonymously, was discovered within 24 hours and named. So anonymization does not mean you can't be identified. Of course, police forces are very interested in this information to solve a crime. And while we may all be very happy that somebody has been caught for a crime, which, and they haven't been before that's a positive thing. But it may involve you and your family. And in the States, they're not very careful, as I said, about naming people, and you and your family's names may be all over the press, despite you having nothing to do with it, or even and near your link may be very distant. And also they have, although they don't necessarily look at personal medical information, they have it. And that can be used to benefit, lots of us may say, okay, I don't mind if they have DNA to do some research on for the public benefit, but don't forget that they are actually using it for their benefit as well, significant benefit. Just thinking about our close relatives, or not so close relatives, let's say you're related as third cousins, well, that's at the sort of great-grandparent level. So be aware of how many relatives you will have on average. So when I say you may be bombarded if you do a genetic test with lots of fifth and sixth cousins, just look at how many you might have anyway. So it's a significant minefield. And of course, lots of those cousins, fourth cousins, fifth cousins, sixth cousins, have not actually given their DNA to this site. So that's a difficulty as well. We may not be able to find the links, because you'll only find the genetic links if you have inherited a bit of shared DNA and somebody has put their DNA on the website. What they're looking for is not that sequence particularly, but it's how much of that sequence is continuous and how much is shared, and it's measured in something called centimorgans. So if you're identical, you'll share 6,800 centimorgans. So you can look, if you do this, you can look at your centimorgan share to see roughly how you may be related. Now, if you don't have a genealogy test and you're just looking sort of DNA that I look at for identity purposes, really we can't go beyond half siblings, uncles and grandparents with confidence. But with this sort of sharing of all of your DNA, you can go down to second cousins with confidence. And you'll see that third cousins share under 1% of their DNA on average. So it becomes a bit more uncertain after that. What they're doing, I'll give an example, is they're looking at these lengths of DNA which are exactly the same with different people. And you may share something because you are related to them, we call that identical by descent, or you may share something because it's just a chance finding, and we call that identical by state, chance sharing. And anything less, and any length less than about 7 centimorgans is most likely to be just chance sharing. This is a bit complicated, so let me try and talk you through. So that sort of yellow and red bar that you can see, it says chromosome 3. So this is chromosome 3, and it's taking 2 people and just colouring where people share markers at the same site. And if it's green, both of your chromosomes are matching the other person's chromosomes exactly at those sites. Then yellow, you're sharing one of those chromosomes exactly, and red, there's nothing in common at those different sites. So you can see that there is an area on the left, and that's highlighted with the blue block below, that is very yellow. There's no red there. And towards the right, you've got another block there, and that's shown in the table. So there is 2, if you look at the table above, there's 2 areas. One has 15.8 centimorgans in length, it's the same, and the next one has a much larger centimorgans. So that suggests that those 2 people, whoever they are, share, you've got 2 bulks, at least on chromosome 3, that they have a lot in common with. I just want to talk a bit about something we call triangulation. So let's say there are 2 people, they share the same paternal grandmother, and you can see that there's a lot of sharing there, a lot of yellow with highlighted with the blue underneath. And maternal grandmother, also lots of sharing between these people and the maternal grandmother, or this person and the maternal grandmother. So does that mean that, all that sharing, I'm sharing with both my paternal grandmother and my maternal grandmother, does it mean that they are linked at all? Seems a lot of sharing. So if I took myself out and just looked at my paternal grandmother and my maternal grandmother, they weren't expecting to be related, and certainly when you look at them without me, you can see all that red, no strong yellow bars proving that they are unrelated. So this triangulation where we look at 3 people is quite important to try and sort out our relatives. So we may share a lot with our grandparents, but really they are unrelated when we look at their DNA. Just to illustrate that a bit more, here are all the 22 chromosomes numbered with the X chromosome, and it's comparison between one person and their first cousin. And you can see there's lots of those purple blocks across most of the chromosomes where you're sharing DNA with your first cousin. Just to compare that with your third cousin, or possibly your third cousin, you can see how little you are sharing. And about 10% of third cousins will not share any DNA. just to reiterate this thing that if you go back 30 generations, we're all related to each other. I don't know whether you remember, there was a study done a few years ago now of this little village in Bedlington, which I think is in Oxfordshire, and about 95% of them are white British and completely convinced that they are white British. But only about 40% of them were, which was a bit of a surprise, I think, to them. When you have a DNA test, you may find that they provide you with other information about where you come from in the world. And what do you make of this when they tell you, 49% Scandinavian, only 2% from Great Britain, my ancestry. What does that actually mean? Does that mean I'm Scandinavian mainly? Well, all it means is that about 50% of my DNA is similar to someone in Scandinavia. It may be that that's because I come from Scandinavia, or maybe because the Scandinavians come from, or the Scandinavian comes from the UK. I've no idea. So what about the accuracy of this information? Well, there isn't anything. Am I a Viking because I got all this Scandinavian ancestry? There's no such thing as a Viking gene or a Jewish gene. The accuracy is really unclear, and it provides. I mean, as far as they're concerned, they think, well, this is a nice story to tell. They're not claiming accuracy. And anyway, what is ethnicity? We may think of Africans and Chinese as being a different race, but they're not really a different race. They have some characteristics, normally a skin color, that's just down to a few small changes in our DNA that have been carried through because those small changes happened in a particular part of the world. Then they're not really any different. And it may be that you have a sort of, if you do this, you may be told you've got a link to Ireland or Ashkenazi Jews. But that's because lots of people in Ireland in America and lots of Jewish people in America are desperate to find that ancestry. So there's many more of them in those databases than there are others. And if an African puts their DNA on the database, they probably won't find that they're African at all because they're not really represented in those databases. And if you put your DNA to different companies, they give you completely different answers. So going to the what we're interested in here today, I'm not going to touch much on the maternal lineage, but just to show you the sort of complexity of the cell with a nucleus which has got our regular DNA and our chromosomes in the middle. There's also some other DNA in this one of these organelles called a mitochondrion. And that's inherited down our maternal line. And it's a very different form of DNA. It's a circular, small bit of DNA, and there is a region which we call the control region, which is more variable, and that's really what we look at to compare and decide people who are related to us maternally. But never forget that our maternal ancestors are actually those pink blobs. We go back in time, they're just a very, very small part of our ancestry, a tiny part. But they can be quite useful because we may be able to find out where our deep-rooted maternal ancestors have come from. And you can see the different letters that are shown there. So if you have an L mitochondrial DNA, you're very likely to have a maternal ancestor from Africa. We probably all came from Africa anyway in the first place. we're particularly interested, of course, in the Y chromosome, that small vestigial bit of chromosome that is just in the males. And again, it's just our father's 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 father. It's a very small bit of your ancestry. And it just happens that that's the bit that we tends to be given our surname. So that's why we're particularly interested in it from the Goddard point of view. I spoke about this a bit before, previously. This is a really interesting case because this man, he was called Murray Pringle, he claimed that he wanted to find out about the Pringle clan. Now, the Pringle clan died out in 1737, and they weren't really Pringles because it was the Pringle clan chief's daughter who married a Pringle. And along with that marriage came a baronetcy of Stichel. But anyway, Norman Murray, or Murray Pringle, which is the one on the bottom right, he said, I want to find out who is the clan chief, because then we can say who is the clan chief and we can have clan meetings or whatever clan people do. Probably a bit like our Goddard meeting. And he tried to persuade his cousin, who's the person on the left, that 10th Baronet, Sir Stuart, to have this test done. And Sir Stuart wasn't particularly interested because he said, well, I don't want to be a clan chief. I don't want to hold meetings or arrange meetings. And Murray said, well, don't worry, I'll do all that for you if you turn out to be the most likely candidate for the clan chief. So eventually the 10th Baronet, Sir Stuart, was persuaded, and it was discovered from the testing that Murray instituted that the 8th Baronet, the one at the top, had not fathered the 9th Baronet. And that meant that the baronetcy should have gone to Ronald Stuart Pringle, and because Ronald is now dead, passed on to Norman. So we think there was an ulterior motive for this clan chief claim. This was taken as far as the Privy Council. And the Privy Council, which is the top court in the UK, gave that baronetcy to Norman Murray Pringle. So he is now the Baronet of Stichel, and it was taken away from Sir Stuart's family. Sir Stuart, in the meantime, he died, and it would have come to his son, but his son now doesn't inherit that. And what this Privy Council decision has done is in fact open the opportunity for any of us who've got a male Y chromosome to search back our family tree to some title and prove that the current owner of that title is not entitled to it, and claim it for yourself. So have fun with that. And of course, yeah, when they tested Richard III, there were obvious lack of paternity in the line of John of Gaunt down to, I think, the Beaufort family, who are direct descendants of, or not, as the case may be, of John of Gaunt. So the Goddards. So we've got 59 people who I've Y chromosome tested, and here all these numbers are just markers that you can see, and each horizontal line is an individual person, and I've color coded some of them. So the colored blocks are people who are reliably related to each other, but not necessarily across those blocks. So you can see we've got some quite significant block sizes and some not so big. And if I go down through the rest of them, You can see some other smaller blocks, but also there are Goddards who are not related to any of the other Goddards that we've tested. So how do we assess whether people are related or not? Well, if you've got a Y chromosome where you share everything, you're very closely related. Yeah, I'm confident about that. And if you only have one difference, then I'm sure you're related. 2 differences, you're probably related. But only 3 differences, you're probably not related. And 4 or more, I'm confident that you are not related in the time that we can look at genealogy relationships. And remember, that's down to about the 3rd and 4th cousins. So if you go back in time, but then you go back to the time 1000, but then we're all related anyway. So here I've just shown you, let's take an individual person, which is number 20. Let's take 20 in the middle, number 21812. And those numbers are the number of Y chromosome marker differences to a person who is off on the left, who you can't see. So 21812, whoever that is, has 36 differences compared with whoever it is on the far left. So each horizontal line is a different person that I've compared the vertical ones to. But go down one line and you can see there's only 1 chromosome difference. So, and I've highlighted that in gold, only 1 difference. So you can see this person has got 3 relatively close ancestors. And the ones in red, they share their Y chromosome DNA. And the ones in pale yellow, they're probably related as well. Now you may say, if I've got an example here, you may say, oh, well, this person, let's take 21808, which is the 3rd one in from the left. You can see there's 3 people who we only show 3 differences with. And you may say, well, that's not very many differences. Probably I'm related to that person. And maybe you are very distantly related, but it may just be because you've all been sitting in about the same part of the world as each other. So you're sharing those just by chance. And that's where I'm going to end. I hope this is a friendly meeting. This is, I think, provided by, is it Brian? Brian, maybe? Anyway, it's on the website. Malcolm will know, I'm sure. So this is on the website. It's a lovely, there is a friendly meeting of those whose surnames be Goddard. Your company is loving, deserved only for society and acquaintance. And really what I want to end with by saying is that we may or we may not have genetic ancestry that we can prove, that we can share, and it may or may not be through the Y chromosome, but that doesn't matter. We've all got an interest in the Goddard family, and we learn a lot about our shared histories through those stories. So I think this is a really good association. So I just